You did a debate the other night with Rachel Maddow.
Best debate the whole cycle.
You know,
well, thanks for saying that.
We've done little small-time local debates
Sure you
and
have.
stuff
I
like
know
that.
you guys have done them too.
And it's very nerve-wracking, not just because of the questions, because of the follow-ups and how you have to be sure you're on your game. So how nervous do you get before a debate like this for President of the United States?
Oh, look, I'm always nervous at any debates. I've done Senate debates, governor's debates. This is the second time I've done any sort of presidential. First time I did it, I had 5 candidates, and that's much harder. Look, Rachel and I caught a break, 2 candidates.
Yeah.
We also caught a break with 2 candidates that were ready to engage. So you definitely get a little bit nervous, but it's the same because you have a responsibility. But I also believe, and I don't want to, my goal is to, if I'm mentioned in the debate story, I want to be no higher than the 8th paragraph. You know what I mean? And the debate was moderated by. That's all you want. If you're in the first graph or 2, that means you were too much a part of the debate. So that's always what I'm most nervous about, and I was glad to know that we weren't the story.
But Chuck, the reason Marjorie and I are smiling at each other as you were speaking is we're watching you and Rachel Maddow do this, and the restraint you showed to allow them to actually debate each other. Marjorie said to me, do you remember what you said to me before we did the first one-on-one in the gubernatorial, Baker and Coakley? Marjorie turned to me before we started and she says, Jim, just remember, you're not running for governor. So isn't that hard to not, I know, look, intellectually I get it, but it's hard, isn't it?
It can be because but you got to remember, you're not interviewing them. When they're here, you're interviewing them, and you pound them. And I think that's the mistake some of our friends at Fox in particular have made. They have not allowed a debate to take place.
Exactly.
They have done a series of candidate interviews with them on stage. Nothing wrong with that. I've been there. I think, there have been some terrific questions, but they're interview questions. And look, that was something Rachel and I worked very hard on. We went back through every one of our questions. We say, are these interview questions? Are they debate questions? And there is a difference.
There's a big difference, and you succeeded very well at that because it was a great, great debate. But you had some issues in your debate, things came out of your debate that we hadn't really heard much about before, such as the artful smear.
Artful smear, that was something else.
It was something else, and there was great...
It began a whole thing.
Yes, and this is a problem for Hillary Clinton, the Wall Street issue.
It's interesting. She's in a bit of a box here because the Democratic Party is shifting to the left a little bit. There's no doubt about it. And she's playing a little bit of catch-up, right? Sanders is maybe closer to where the heart of the Democratic Party is right now. This Wall Street frustration has been building since before the Occupy movement, but of course the Occupy movement, in some ways, you could argue, is the Sanders is sort of the core of that Sanders campaign. And on one hand, you hear, look, we heard it from Bill Clinton yesterday, right? He said, if you just take any money from Goldman Sachs, you're automatically this. You can't do anything. It frustrates them, but they can't get too upset about it because this is the party's in one place. So it's interesting to watch the restraint she has to show in wanting to, on one hand, say, look, I'm going to be just as tough on Wall Street as he is. But when he says things like Wall Street, the entire idea of it is based on a fraud. Notice she didn't push back on that during the debate. Now, I had to ask her about it on Meet the Press on Sunday, but she didn't want to push back because she didn't want to look like she was defending Wall Street. Like, that's the box she's in. She wants to also be a critic of Wall Street, but a responsible critic. I think that's been her, and she's in a box on this, and it's tough when you're in a primary.
How does she get out of that box? It seems to me you got her deeper in the box with a question about the speeches. Will you release the transcripts, not just of your Wall Street speeches, but the other? And the answer, I thought, assuming she knew a question like that was going to come someday, I'll look into it. Subsequently, she says, if others do, there's a point at which she's got to do it, right?
I guess I don't think she
expected it. I guess she didn't, yeah.
But because I don't think you give an answer like that if you had prepped.
That's a fine point.
On that one. I hadn't realized until after the fact how much the campaign had actually been asked about this privately from a whole bunch of other news organizations. We saw after that Washington Post did a whole story about how much they've been asking about this. So the campaign should have been a bit more, it sounds like, a bit more prepared on it as well. Look, this is a challenge for her, and she's just got to, I think, find a different angle. She's not going to win the who's tougher on who's more anti-Wall Street fight. So she's got to find other things. I think that's why she tried to pivot to foreign policy. The problem for her on this is right now, particularly in this state, foreign policy and national security is what, like a 9% of voters care about it? It's not. Republican primary is a different story. It's a top issue among Republicans. It's not a top issue among Democrats here. Maybe down the road it'll become one when there is a different focus on Sanders as an actual potential nominee. But right now, that's another problem she has. There is this sense that, yeah, Sanders is still a little bit of a protest vote, and you never can beat back a protest vote. But what happened, if it can turn into where Sanders is being taken as a legitimate potential president, then perhaps on foreign policy she can then have a better shot at creating differences.
We're talking to Chuck Todd from Meet the Press and MTP Daily.
Let's talk a little bit about another problem that I think has kind of surprised Hillary, is that women now are voting more for, or predicted to vote more for, Bernie Sanders than for her.
Well, at least here.
Yes,
yeah,
it's
not been overall.
In New
but
Hampshire.
Here, yeah.
And there's this older woman, younger woman thing where the younger women are much more with Bernie and the older women are more with Hillary. And now we have Gloria Steinem, famed feminist, stepping in.
She walked it back, though, I believe.
She walked it back. She initially said to Bill Maher that one of the reasons young women are with Bernie because that's where the boys are, and the Bernie boys, and see the Bernie get dates at the campaign. Then she backed away from that. Madeleine Albright was saying, I'm paraphrasing, that there's a place in hell for women who don't support other women. Is this a good thing for Hillary, or is this a bad thing?
It doesn't come across well, but let me defend both Madeleine Albright, the sentiment behind it, or my mom will chew me out. I mean, and I say this in that, let's remember, my mom has worked her whole life, and my mother didn't get promotions because she was a woman. My mother was that. We forget that generation, and I think that's what Gloria Steinem and Madeleine Albright are trying to say. It's like, you younger generation, you don't realize it wasn't that long ago that men could get away with patting women on the bottom, and it was just a joke, or you didn't get promotions because you were a woman, or there was only and then when there was only one seat for a woman, all of a sudden, and that's what Madeleine Albright's saying, women would beat up other women essentially rhetorically in order to get that seat, and it wasn't a good time to be a woman in the workplace. And so that's the frustration of this older generation. So I think I get where this sentiment is coming from. It doesn't wear well, I think, in public, and it's certainly the younger generation of women who have grown up in a much more egalitarian society are thinking, what's this about?
Yeah.
And they're not thinking in terms fully of gender. But I think this has been a problem for the Clinton campaign for a long time. I remember 6 months ago when we'd asked, how are you going to tap into millennials? And the Clinton campaign assured me, millennials, when you tell them you're electing the first woman president, they're going to love it. Like and it hasn't translated. She hasn't galvanized women yet for her. My 11-year-old is obsessed with seeing the first woman president, a girl president.
That's
okay,
great.
So it's interesting, and you hear this, that among young girls it's there, but among young adult women it isn't there per se. So I think that's they haven't closed that loop yet, and I think it's how they get that. If she can create excitement around that idea, then she might be able to create overall excitement around her campaign. But she failed to do it 8 years ago, and now she's failing so far to do it again.
Your mother just emailed. She said she's very proud of
All
this.
right.
Everything is
Thanks, Jim.
So Trump has called you a dummy. I assume that he means that respectfully.
It's always respectful.
You should
With
be-
all due respect, you're a dummy.
that's right.
You should be fired like a dog.
Yeah.
And despite that, you just sort of joined. David Axelrod may have started this when he wrote that piece in the Sunday Times a few weeks ago, saying I was very dismissive of Trump. I didn't get it. I think you called yourself a snob. Did you not?
That's
something
I
you
said we all were snobs about
Yeah,
it.
explain
true.
explain
It is
that a little
true.
bit.
And the point is that I think we were also focused on him, the personality, and thinking, this guy, rather than realizing he was tapping into something. And I think we were dismissive of Trump, the individual, at the expense of dismissing also Trump and the people that he was appealing to. And that's what I mean by it. And I think that and I throw myself into this category that first couple of months from June to August. Because, look, I've covered Trump now. I've covered these Trump flirtations for president for over a decade, nearly 20 years, it seems like. So that's why I was dismissive of him. And I just didn't pay attention to, and you realized, wait a minute, there's something happening here. There's something that he's appealing to. And our responsibility as journalists is to explain that. Regardless of, at first you think, this is just a showman looking for attention. And maybe that was his motivation. Well, it doesn't matter now. He's got it. There's a following, and the following's real. These people are frustrated. They're angry. They're fed up. They feel left behind. Maybe it's culturally. Some of it's economic. It's a whole mix here. I think we also we also try to assume it's only economic. It's not only economic. This is a cultural backlash as well that I think, look, a lot of cultural changes have taken place in this country in the name of progress. And for the most part, it's going to make us a better country. But in the meantime, there are people that feel as if they've been dismissed.
Chuck, Todd, I'm sorry, Marjorie, go ahead.
You talked yesterday, too, about this whole Megyn Kelly women reporter thing with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he said he's been respectful to other women like Andrea Mitchell from NBC.
Right.
But one of the theories about Megyn Kelly is that she's a very smart lawyer. She's bested a lot of really good debaters, including Bill Clinton, and that part of Trump's reticence to debate...
You meant Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly, what did I say?
Bill Clinton.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill O'Reilly. Reticence was because he was worried about getting bested by her.
Could be.
Again, that he's intimidated by her.
It could be.
To that?
And there was a look, I think you can't help but ask yourself that. But I go back to something that we talked about earlier about debates. I also think Megyn Kelly didn't ask a debate question. She asked an interview question. And obviously maybe she was frustrated that she hadn't gotten a one-on-one with him.
Yeah.
And so she wanted to get a few questions that she wanted to ask. And I have a problem with debate moderators that say, hey, look at me. Look at me. No. Look at the candidates on stage. They're the ones that are running. No matter what you think of them, they're the ones that are running. I think she should have saved those for an interview. But again, I also want to empathize. I think all the questions were good questions. I don't want to, but that's where when the storyline became about those two, Roger Ailes may have been happy because it's good for ratings, but it's not good for journalism.
You know, it's pretty clear I'm never going to be able to do a debate again. I mean, based upon these criteria.
Well, you know what else is pretty clear? This is an unusually humble guy in this business.
No, I'm not. Look, I have an ego too, and I want to ask the tough question, and I want to be known. Whatever. We all have egos. I'm not saying that, but we're in charge of the public discourse. You guys are. We're in charge of it. If we want to rebuild trust with viewers and listeners, which of course we all know we're struggling with. We get attacked all the time, right? We think our trust, one of the ways to rebuild that trust is to realize we are their representative.
Does Trump go home? I mean, he came in second, even though he says he probably came in first, based upon Cruz's skullduggery out there. Winning is the brand. We've heard it 1,000 times. Let's assume he comes in second, which is unlikely based on polling. He comes in second here. Does he go to South Carolina? Does he go to Nevada? What does he do?
I know, right? Well, I'm hesitant to assume anything with him anymore because we all thought there were so many times he might take his ball and go home. But I have noticed a different Trump since Iowa. For him, he seems humbled.
He does.
I think if he wins, and he admitted to me he's got to do a little bit more in his campaign, that maybe he needs to do some traditional. They thought they could do this a non-traditional way, and I think he realizes, no, look, he can get to where he got in a non-traditional way, but if he wants to win, he's going to have to do some traditional political mechanics. So, I think if he loses, that'll be interesting. Look, I think that the problem he has if he loses is that it then feeds the perception that we all thought was the case, which is, boy, his support's not real. But if he wins here, I do think you're going to see a more traditional campaign start being built. I think because then suddenly it's like, I want to win, and if he wants to win, he knows it takes a little more work.
Chuck Todd, thank you very much for taking the
This was
time
fun.
to be
I'm
with
sure
us
I got
today.
myself in trouble with
By
something.
the way,
No, you
both of
didn't.
us hope you were never fired like a dog. I want to be clear. I'm speaking for Marjorie and me both, Chuck Todd.
Hey, look, I just, if you get fired, you just want to be fired with a nice severance.
That's right.
That's always the goal of firing.
We've had that, actually. Thank you. Chuck, it's great to see you. Thanks so much.